we good, Dan? Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We have a fantastic event for you tonight. It is the second in our My Story series. I'm not going to steal Naveen's thunder. I'll let him do the actual intro, but we are in for a real treat this evening. My name is Kiran Malhotra. I'm the Executive Director for Thai Silicon Valley. And as I do for every event, I like to give folks a little bit of a flavor of what Thai is all about, a little bit of the history for those, maybe the one or two of you in the audience who don't know or need a refresher. So first, I'd like to see how many members I have in the audience. How many Thai members? Fantastic. And how many are not Thai members yet? Great. So I actually counted all of you, and I know where you're sitting, so I'm going to tell Patricia to catch you on the way out. I guarantee that after this event that you will want to run to Patricia and become a Thai member, because this is just one of a lot of wonderful events and things that we do at Thai. So just to give you a little bit of a background, Thai was founded here in the Silicon Valley in 1992 by a group of entrepreneurs who came to the valley, mostly from the South Asian region, from Indus region, and they became very successful as entrepreneurs and corporate executives. And they did this without a lot of safety net, without a lot of mentoring, without anything. They did this, by the seat of their pants and a good education. And they said, you know what? Wouldn't it be nice if we could help other entrepreneurs to succeed? And so that's what they did. They came together on a monthly basis, and they told their stories, and they would bring a speaker every month, and that person would tell their story, and they would mentor other entrepreneurs. And so from 1992, here in the Silicon Valley, with that small group, we've grown into 56 chapters in 13 countries. And the sole mission of Thai is to nurture and foster entrepreneurship. And that is always the sole purpose of all the things that we do at Thai. We have three major stakeholders at Thai. Actually, we have four major stakeholders I'll mention. The first ones are you all, the members of Thai. So membership has its privileges. We have about 50 plus programs throughout the year, not including our big flagship conference, ThaiCon, which I'll mention in just a few moments. We offer discounted rates on all of the programs. We provide mentoring. We have a Business Builders Breakfast series. So there's a lot of things to take advantage of at Thai as a member of Thai. We also have our charter member community. Now our charter members are a little bit of a smaller group. They're invited to be charter members by other charter members of Thai. There's roughly about 300 charter members of the Silicon Valley chapter. And these are very, very successful entrepreneurs, successful corporate executives, and successful academics. And they are invited to be here, and we ask of them one very, very important thing, the most important thing you can ask of anybody, and that is to give us their intellectual capital and their time. And the great thing about it is that they give of their time very freely. And so they provide the backbone, and they provide the folks who mentor our membership. And I want to see a show of hands there's a lot of charter members in the room today. Can you raise your hands very high? So I think my entire board is here, so I'm sweating a little bit. And I'd like to introduce just a few, starting with the board. Mr. Vish Mishra, the president of our board. Can you stand, Vish? If you don't know Vish, then I don't know who you are, because the man knows everybody, and he knows their family, and he's a great person to know, and it's fun working with him. I see Paul Singh is our marketing chair. Naveen Bisht is our program chair and the host for this evening. And I see Sanjay Mittal, our systems chair. And Murali Rangarajan in the back over there. He is our membership chair. And I thought Venk was here, but maybe he hasn't. Oh, there he is. Oh, sorry. See, Venk, you're always in the corner. Venk is our charter member chair. And then we have a number. Can charter members all raise their hands once more, please, very high? So they're all scattered around the room, and you should find these people and go sit next to them and go pick their brain, because they're very, very knowledgeable. They give very freely of their time, and they're good people to know and very connected in the community. We have a third stakeholder, and those are our sponsor community. Now our sponsors are the VCs, the corporates, the banks, and service providers. And they provide the lifeblood to Thai, and they provide us funding for some of the programs all the programs that we do. And we certainly could not do the events that we do and the number of events and the things that we do without their generous support. And I know that I have some of the sponsors in the room today. I know Stan's back there with Morgan Stanley. and there's some other folks in the room. So thank you to all the sponsors, and thank you to all of our membership, our charter membership, and all of our stakeholders. And out of these three stakeholders comes our fourth stakeholder, and those are our volunteers. So one of the really amazing things about the Thai network is that I have, everybody is a volunteer. The only paid people are my team of about 4 people and myself. But the board of directors, all the people who come to Thai, you see at the door, the people who volunteer for ThaiCon, the people who come to speak, these people are all volunteers and they give up their time. And that's all of you. And we cannot do the programs that we do without all the support of our volunteers. So I would like to give all of you a round of applause for the commitment and support that you give to Thai all year round. Just a few more things. I mentioned we do about 50 to 60 programs a year. I want to highlight a couple of them. The first one is My Story, which we just launched last month. So this is the second My Story event, and it looks to be like it's a very successful and great event for Thai, and it kind of takes us back to our roots, because as I mentioned in the beginning, we used to do monthly meetings where we would bring a successful entrepreneur and they would talk and inspire others. So this is really kind of going back to our roots. The second program I would like to highlight a little bit is our Thai Angels Forum. And this program was launched in August of last year. And it is for emerging and promising startup companies to get seed funding. And we have already funded 5 companies, and to the tune of about $2.5 million, which is roughly about a company a month since the launch, which is really remarkable. And I have members of the steering committee here who comprise of our board members and some other folks. Can you raise your hand, Thai Angels Steering Committee folks? So if folks are interested in the Thai Angels, you can see any of them. We also have you can apply directly online. How many of you are entrepreneurs looking for seed funding? You can apply directly online and click on Thai Angels, and it'll take you through the whole process. But if you have any questions, you certainly can ask them. You can certainly shoot me an email. I'm very happy to answer any questions. I also wanted to mention our big event, which is coming up in just about 5 weeks, and that is ThaiCon 2011. So I know most of you have probably signed up or registered for ThaiCon already, correct? Yes? If you haven't, you really should. And we are offering a special promo code discount just for tonight. It expires tomorrow. And if you are interested in that, Patricia has the promo code for you. You can go directly to her. But we have a great lineup of programs at ThaiCon this year. We have already confirmed Vinod Khosla as a keynote speaker. We've confirmed Steve Case as a keynote speaker. We've confirmed Sal Khan of the Khan Academy as a breakthrough thinker. And we've got 15 other content sessions that are really outstanding and fantastic, that are really coming to shape. The other unique thing that we're doing this year is we're doing a program called Mentor Connect. And that is where we have, it's almost like a speed dating with charter members. You get a charter member and you get to be mentored by them in a small group at ThaiCon. And we're doing a couple of those throughout the couple of days at ThaiCon. So that's just a little flavor of some of the things that we're doing this year. I hope that we see you all at ThaiCon. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Naveen, and you can get the show on the road. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kiran. Imagine you're 19-year-old and you're in India, you're a second-year college student. You realize there is a lot of happening in Silicon Valley. You just heard about it, the computing revolution, and you want to be a part of it. Now, what do? You drop out of the college, you buy a plane ticket and show up in Silicon Valley. How many of you, those of us who are from India, could have done that? Show me your hands. Oh, one. That's good. So this is what Samir did. Samir not only dropped out of Birla Institute of Technology and Science, where he was studying electrical engineering in 85, and he landed in San Francisco and found a job at Apple Computer. Then he worked there for a number of years, doing cutting-edge innovations, even with John Scully, and then went on to found NetObjects, one of the pioneering web design tools company, and I think a lot of you may have used it in mid-90s. And guess what? Within 2 years of its founding, company was acquired by IBM. Then he went on to investing into a number of startups, including Tickle, which was acquired by Monster.com. And guess what? Tickle was one of the one of the first social networking sites. Of course, you guys know about Facebook. So from there, in 2002, Samir realized that a lot of high-end brand names were not on the web. So in order to lure them online and connect them with the audiences on the web, he founded Glam Media. And today, Glam is one of the fastest and hottest web properties targeted towards women, with over 80 million unique visitors per month in the United States alone, and over 200 million uniques globally. Samir breathes and lives Glam Media, and he lives the corporate brand of Glam, which is pink in color. So to support his vision and for his success, we have a number of my friends over here wearing pink, including myself. So we want to make sure Samir is highly successful. He's been already. With that, let's give a big round of applause to Samir Arora, founder, chairman,
It's going to be hard to follow. When Naveen reached out to me and asked for me to come in and share some stories, I said, do you need a presentation? What do we do? And what he said is, just come out here and just walk through without a lot of slides. Make sure you wear pink, so I am wearing pink for you. I also appreciate others in the audience who decided to wear pink. In case you don't know me, I did not own a single pink before I started Glam. So, in fact, I didn't even start wearing pink after I invested and wrote the first check for Glam founders. It was only after I became CEO, which is about 4.5 years ago, that I decided, I think I might just try to, put my toe in and embody this brand. And little did I know what would happen. First, there was a lot of laughter, and then following that, it did become the brand, and now I'm called on it. Anytime I go into a meeting, anywhere I go, they think I get up and wear pink every day. So let's start with stories and stories. That is a real story. So I was thinking a lot about, given the audience here and this range of great talent and energy that feeds the valley, what could I possibly come and talk about and say that would be entertaining, be of value, and maybe connect some dots for you. Just like, I have to go back and think about my life and say, this is not a normal interview, we're not sitting and talking, that's what I thought we would do. That's what we did when we met at the last reunion together. It's about stories. So what I thought I'd do is use a backdrop of the world. And if you were born before the 60s, I apologize, I have nothing credible to say. So, it's not about you. I could make up stuff, but it would be a story. So, I'm going to not do that. So if I look at it, if you can just switch to my computer, let's check, and then let's start with just making sure this projects. If this is a problem, I can switch to the other mic.
Yeah.
It's okay?
You want to do that?
This mic is misbehaving.
Like Madonna used to.
I'll switch. Okay, here we go. Let's try that again. I think you can probably hear me better with this. So, I think wearing pink is probably the easiest way to embody the fact that technically, whether we were born here or in India, I represent the flower child decade. While this was happening, as we all know, especially if you were in India, as I was, a different energy was there. But it was, of course, like everything else, the synchronicity of what was happening in the world was also affecting us. So I try to find some images that some of you will remember and laugh at, especially if you remember what was happening at this time, between here and there. For me, the journey really began in Delhi. I was born in a family that had lived in Delhi for a long time, and I've tried very hard to trace the roots, and I could not find a single person on my father's side that was not an entrepreneur. So that's interesting. In fact, later in the story, when I joined Apple, that was a very contentious, leaving college midway to come here was contentious enough, but actually, I remember having a conversation where I was asked, so you're working for someone, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said, no, I'm not working for him, I'm working for a company. It's like, how can you work for someone? The basic concept of working for someone or being of service to someone was alien on my father's side. Fortunately, on my mother's side, it's a long list of educators, and there became the second problem of how could you ever imagine leaving college? So between those two, if there's any archetypical frame of reference that we have in our families, and I'm sure all of you have either benefited from that or suffered from that or both. In my case, those were the two routes. I was very fortunate. I went to an outstanding school, and I had the fortune of meeting one of the leading thinkers who was the principal of that school recently, very, very late in his age. That was Sensegas. He went on to be the education minister of India and brought about a lot of incredible reform, Father Kununcle. And we were raised extremely secular, as many of you were, in schools like that. And I joke about it now. We celebrated every religious holiday, correct?
Yes.
It didn't matter. There was no secular didn't mean no religions or all. First, there's no snow day in Delhi, so you get religious holidays, right? So that's a vivid memory, as a story of mine, is celebrating holidays, including having a Christmas tree every year. Why, I don't understand, but it was there. I had missed a lot of what happened, both in my school years and my college years, because unlike most people, I broke from the group and I came to work for Apple here, and completely lost touch. And that was a period, there was no internet, there was not even web connectivity. So there was a long period of time where I actually didn't communicate with anyone from my high school, for example, or even earlier. So just the last couple of years, that group has kind of reborn, and even our college groups have started to find each other out. And it's fascinating for every one person, and I'm sure this rings true for you, that remembers nothing, there's someone who remembers everything. And I'll tell you a true story of a very dear friend of mine who had even forgotten his name, let alone his face, who came up to me, this is December, and he said, I was always involved in doing whatever schoolwork is required, but I was very, very extracurricular from the beginning. So as in most parts of society, you're put into a box. And I found that there was no box I quite fit in because I wanted to be in multiple boxes. So the fact that I was in music and theater from a very young age, while I also loved math and physics, made me an outsider or an insider to both. So in his case, who is probably one of the top scholars that I know even today, he came to me and said, the first time I noticed you was in 8th grade. I'm like, okay, what happened? He said, you may not remember, but whoever the president was at that time came to our school, and to prepare for that, we had this national scholar thing going on. I don't remember any of this. I don't know if you remember that there used to be, there must have been. And he said they kind of walked around and asked this question, and I said, I'm looking at this grown-up man, and I'm like, how the hell do you remember these things? And he looks at me and says, the question they asked was, there's a, I guess, I have to remember exactly the words, there's a positron, for those of you who are physically inclined in this room, that is attracting another particle. What can you say about the other particle? And he went first. He apparently answered whatever he remembered. The other particle, of course, was electron. And they said, they come to me, and I said, there's not much you can tell about the other particle. And that he said, apparently so, I have no recollection of this, that was the right answer. And I looked at this guy and I said, wow, how do you remember these stories? He said, oh, that's nothing. I know everyone's grade throughout school. And I was like, well, thank God you're around, because can you just walk me around and let me relive my childhood? So I've just had 18 months of deep immersion. And by the way, any of my stories about the 60s and 70s could be a figment of his imagination, so just bear with me. Okay? I do have a vivid memory of going to the ocean the first time. And it's a theme that replays in my life over and over again. I generally go to the beach, and I think many of us have this incredible connection with water or waves or the sound. And I've done it enough times, and a lot of people say, how do these big ideas hit you? They usually hit me on the beach. So if you see me on the beach, I'm hoping a big idea will help, hit me. It usually has. But my first big idea that hit me was the gentleman on the far left of you. If you remember who this is, anybody? I went to Bollywood with my grandmother. I had my first encounter with the ocean. Being a landlocked city, as you all know, the river doesn't really count, though we do have sand beaches if you're from Delhi. I don't know where they are, but there's a memory that I made sand castles. Is this true? Anyone else did this in Delhi? So it is true. I'm validating my childhood as I go along against my friends' stories. I met him, and to prepare for this meeting, apparently, I was 4.5 years old. I dressed like him. Now, I don't know if that's what my grandmother made me do or my mom made me do, but that is a very clear memory. I don't know what I wore, but I remember going to the set. I guess you could go to the set those days and meet superstars, and it's a beautiful memory. I was also fortunate. My grandfather, in his entrepreneurial business, was deeply involved with independence and was very closely associated with the founding fathers of India. The single biggest reason being he ran Constitutional House and the Parliament, all the actual places the ministers stayed in Delhi. So I have a vivid memory of Nehru giving my sister a rose and chocolates. I have very good memories of my sister running around and locking all the ministers, because in India, as you remember, you lock doors from the outside. So there's some very interesting history in the family of how India was being created. And the birth of this great nation was happening in a very, personal way through our family history. What happened to me, I think, in the 70s, and I have some fantastic photos. I had fun doing this, thank you. I don't think there's a single photograph in here we will not relate to and laugh about. I did look like that. I think so did most of you. And you can choose the male or female figure, but we all played these figures. I tried very hard not to introduce any personal photographs that may incriminate me in this. So if that looks like me, it's actually not me. I was fortunate. I was picked up by accident or luck or fate. I'm not sure. But I was put on stage at under 6 years old, 5.5, and started to do Broadway musicals and serious theater with a small group called Theater Action Group TAG by an incredible leader, Barry John. And there were 12 of us who were then later picked to be a part of this group that wrote and produced musicals, plays, and the first television. If you remember, that was the birth of television in India. We had 2 channels, both black and white, one without sound most of the time, and both without power half the time, right? How quickly we forget the 70s. That group had an incredibly deep effect. If I look at the effect this incredible school and the Jesuits had on my upbringing, I would say Barry and the Theater Action Group had a very strong effect as well. When you're a child actor, and I remember reading about this from several child actors that became famous in Hollywood, that when you're young and you do all these things, you look back and start realizing that you were in some amazing productions where you touched people and changed the world, and you always think it's you. And as you grow older, you realize it wasn't anything to do with you, actually. So that was a fascinating learning through this process. I think I did about 30 productions, from Evita to Jesus Christ Superstar to The Death of an Anarchist to Kafka's Metamorphosis at 14, which I reread last year. I still don't understand it, but time, maybe that will change. Those 12 people, all of us completely dispersed. Mira Nair came here. I just saw her after many years, after 27 years last year, at the launch of one of her movies with Abhishek. Shah Rukh, of course, became Shah Rukh. Barry John moved to Mumbai and runs one of the top acting guilds and studios. And the rest, someone runs Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, everyone's scattered. What I realized was I was the only person in that group that did not stay in the entertainment business, which is fascinating. Because in that box, that's what I was supposed to do. And that is the story of my life. I generally don't stay in boxes for very long. What I learned in that process was how do you manage extremely creative, high ego talent. That makes Silicon Valley really easy for me. And if you think about that, I look at all the companies who try to transcend Silicon Valley with Hollywood, Silicon Valley with hardware, Silicon Valley with banking, Silicon Valley with any other, and they say there are two sides. I'm sure you've heard this, and one side doesn't understand the creativity in the other, correct? We always hear this. Oh, software engineers are really creative, and other people think software engineers are really either boring or scientific. Other people say, finance and accountants, that's a really, mathematical job. How can you be creative? I see a friend of mine sitting who's extremely creative, right here. It's just we don't understand another person's point of view, or another. And the story of my life is to understand multiple points of views, having lived in different parts. The last phase of the 70s for me ended up, as you remember, paralleling a change in India as well. And an incredible decade started right after this. If I summarize what happened for me in having this dual role of being in school as a student young, and at the same time being in very, very deep theater, music, and TV, it's a fascinating, I look back and said how fortunate I was, and of course it worked because it brought out my passions as well. I remember doing a musical called Kid Stuff that was about how the education system in India does not work. Sponsored by our very famous now Jesuit principal, who had the openness to actually have that challenged in front of him and everybody else. And that kind of questioning of your basic beliefs is very rarely done unless you're really sure of your beliefs. You have to be very sure of your beliefs. And if I look back to my life, there's an underlying theme there of what started very young at question everything. Don't take it at face value. These challenges, of being in the places that give us unease are usually the areas you discover change, and change resides in those spaces. And that has happened again as a story over and over again. My first appearance on stage, and that's an incredible theme that came back 25 years later as a major part of my life, was in Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado. And I was painted white to look Japanese, and sang Miyasama, Miyasama, Anya Monya Maya ni, which I still don't know what it means. Do I speak enough Japanese that I should? And I look back to that richness of this culture and how it had found ways to reach all the way to us as a fountainhead. And I also remember very distinctly the group beginning to separate into the performers and the writers and directors. And that was a very clear separation. There were people who were extremely good. If you've seen Broadcast News, anybody? Broadcast News, the movie? It's a fantastic movie to see this bridge that happens very clearly where you're one or the other. And in our case, a lot of them, like Nir and I, were outstanding directors, and they went that path, and other people were outstanding actors, and they went that path. And for me, production, writing, and organizing people was very important. Little known fact about me is that's what brought me to computers. At the end of all the plays and musicals, we always had to mix all the sound. And considering I was from a young age trained to be in, of all the things, Western classical music in India. It's an oxymoron, as we probably know, but that brought this element of sound as a very deep part of my upbringing. And the world changed in the late 70s for India, about 7 years after it had started to change here. And that was the invention of the first computer chip, the 555, as we called it. That brought the era of personal computing and created the term Silicon Valley, as we know. And there was a delay. That was the time India was the most close, the most socialist, and the most controlled, as we remember. And there was an incredible delay in information flow. I remember seeing this as a part of my sound, audio, hardware side, and a huge light bulb went off in my head, and decided with a group of people that we will start what is now known as the term personal computer hackers. So yes, I was a bona fide hacker. We did things we shouldn't have done. We're very proud of them. And we started to make kits. We started to program lights going on and off. It was a fantastic era. And we were quite a bit behind what was happening here. In 1976, a very famous article was written at Stanford, which was the beginning of the word AI, which is still starting, and Lisp was being created. We, in our wisdom, decided to write an interpreter for Lisp. And if you know what I'm talking about, come talk to me later. It was an unbelievable opening. This concept of a machine could then have software that you could program that wasn't a big IBM 1130, which was my first computer. So somehow in that era, I moved out of my cycles, which I look at my life, and there's a 7-year or 12-year, 7-year business cycle, 12-year life cycles. I started to move out of the entertainment industry into computers, into hardware first, and very influenced by the visual design and architecture. You probably don't remember this, but I tossed a coin to go to college. Literally did, between architecture and design and BITS. If you're from India, you probably know if you get into BITS or IIT, you don't toss a coin, right? You pretty much go there. You're done. I was not sure till the last moment, and as luck would have it, BITS won, and I decided I wanted to be a chip designer. And if anyone knew me then, they were like, I remember coming back home after my first semester, and my mom asked me, how many plays have you started? I said, none. Are you in the basketball team? I was school captain. No, didn't play any basketball. It's another big surprise. You must be doing some swimming or something like that. Nope. Okay. Is there a theater group that you're bringing there? Nope. And she just went down all the things she thought I would be doing. She's like, what did you do all here? Well, what I did was sat in a computer room with cut-off gloves, if anyone remembers these days, wearing almost every warm thing I owned, because for whatever reason we decided in India that computers like to be frozen. It's unbelievable. For whatever reason we believe they're not frozen, some dirt or something will get in them and they will stop working, right? And if you know my history later as a software engineer, one of the reasons my code to the date remains relatively bug-free the first time is I had the unfortunate task of programming using paper cards. And the run was every 72 hours. So imagine in our beautiful ADD world that we live now, where you finish a week of work and you hand in your stack of cards, you come back after 72 hours, if you're nice to the systems admin, and you find an error on the third card. And you repair the bug, and then you go back. So that taught us very, very quickly, think before you type, think before you think, plan before you think. So that's where that process started. With that was an overlay into the 80s. I love getting these, and I love that photo. I don't know who took those and put them together. But it is about as clear a definition. You know, I think the 60s and the 70s were a little bit easier because there was one thing. We agree? There was one big thing. Now, by the 80s, it starts to get a little confusing because that theme of freedom, women's rights, and the flower child is running rampant, right? While greed is coming in, and those are about as opposite themes as it gets, and it's captured about as well as it can. I had the extreme fortune of joining Apple's distributor in India, out of Hong Kong, before the Mac was introduced. That, to me, is a single most defining moment in my life. There was probably 7 of us in that office, and I got to work on the Lisa. By then, things had started to compress, microprocessors were easily available, and Apple, as we all know, is going to introduce a revolutionary computer on July 28th, 1984, called the Macintosh. This is about the same time as I was joining BITS Pilani, as you can imagine, going to BITS, showing up while deciding I'm starting to work for this company called Apple. So, unbeknownst to BITS, I had a super accelerated program in my head. I showed up and I asked them a question they had never been asked before, which is, can I accelerate in the first quarter, or semester, I guess? And BITS was one of those few colleges that was set on a 4-year GPA system by originally MIT. It was very not British, Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science education, though it was extremely Indian in the way that the first course was linear algebra as a 5-unit course, which I think at MIT is a 3rd year or maybe later, maybe they don't do it these days, course, right? So I show up and I said, I heard you can accelerate and do dual majors. They're like, well, you can do dual majors, but you have to wait a year. Like, okay, I won't do that. How about the acceleration? And they went through all their rules, and they couldn't find a rule prohibiting someone to accelerate. So I said, how many courses can I take? And they're like, they went through their rule book and said, there's no rule. So I decided in my wisdom to take every course that I could, until someone found out that I had no time for lunch, breakfast, or dinner. And then things got a little problematic, and they gave it to some very smart people, smarter than me, to write a computer program to never allow that again. But I remember going there and starting on a separate set of courses, because as we remember, there was no course in computer science when I went to college, not one. I actually had the fortune of meeting a gentleman in Cal many years later who was actually the first batch of the first computer science program in the world. So, it was a double E, or triple E, I guess, major. I don't know what the 3rd E is. Do you remember? Electrical and electronic engineering, because we hadn't let go of the real hardware. But we had started, there was room there to breathe and learn, and really learn to code. So we did what we did. We learned game theory on our own. We learned to program on our own. We found any books, pages, anything we could find that was not coming from Russia, and learn as quickly as we can. We grew up, as most of you know, believing that everything was invented in the world and by another Russian scientist at the same time, unbelievably. It was fascinating as a learning. While doing this, I found myself more and more drawn to this little tiny company called Apple, and found myself exceedingly outside of Pilani without knowledge of my parents and of the professors, maintaining my grades, while taking a bus ride. How long was that bus ride? 5 hours to Delhi, and the riots happened around this period. If you were around, you remember. And then the light bulb just went off. The light bulb was, people asked me this question many, many times. Why would you drop out of school in India at that time and leave? And I don't think, there's 2 answers. It's either a very simple answer or it's a very complicated answer, right? The simple answer is you were young and dumb. Absolutely. You just didn't know the implications of what you were doing. And I think that fully applies to me, especially the dumb part. The other answer is it's a process based on a lot of things that had happened in my life that gave me a feeling one day, I have to be here in Cupertino. There's no way I can describe it. I don't know why that happened. It was a beacon like no beacon you know. The story, knowing that's the topic today, that I told my parents is I'd like to go there for the first Mac World. And they said, you'll never get a visa. Are there anyone here who didn't get a visa on their first application, or know someone who didn't? I know you did. Very tough. No visas were being issued. Now, can you imagine someone like me showing up in between school? I would be, if there was a list of everything to avoid in terms of dangers of immigration, I would be 100 points in that. Do you agree? I mean, that's about as clear as it gets. But I walked in, there was not even a question. American consulate gave me a visa. The first application, that was on a Monday. On Monday night, one of my best friends gave me a little plaque I still have that said, one of these days your ship will come in, and with your luck, you'll be at the airport. On Tuesday night, I was on a plane. It's a true story. So at one level, no one had a chance to even assimilate the fact that I was going to be gone as fast as I was gone. And that was it. I actually didn't go back for almost a decade after that. So that was just like that. Now, little did I know what would happen on the other side. So I had to have some family. I have family in Long Island. I believe it's the only one Indian non-Jewish family in all of 5 towns, and they still are. So I show up. I left a message for my aunt, my father's very dear younger sister, a doctor. As you know, in most Indian families, there's a doctor in the house, there's a lawyer in the house, there's always someone who can take care of all the needs. We have all of those. And they didn't believe me. Of course, can you imagine if someone you've not heard from till, since they were 6 years old calls you, a niece or a nephew, and says, Bua, I'm going to be there tomorrow. You're going to be like, that's a crank call. Right? It's not happening. I showed up and they weren't home. So that's a true story. So I'm here. I have my bags. I'm from JFK. Fortunately, they live close by. I don't know what to do. So I go to the neighbor, who's now become, over the years, very good friends with them. I just knocked on their door, knowing you don't do that in America, especially not in the 5 towns. And I said, can you keep my luggage? And they said, of course we can. So here we are. We drop the luggage. I go to my first Burger King, have my great big juicy burger, Coke and fries, and I wander around. I come back later, and they see me. And to the date, my uncle remembers the story. He walked me up and down, convincing me this is the biggest mistake I've ever made, and I should get back on a plane and go back to India that day. And if I didn't, he would personally be liable and shot by my parents. That came later. And it was fascinating. It wasn't that, it wasn't just that I was young, dumb, and arrogant, which we all are in our teens. It was also, I just, I listened to him, actually, and it was done. It was really, it's one of those things, as it was really just done. There was no question about it. Now, what I was going to do, where I was going to do it, I had no idea. This was not clear. So a lot of stories about me say that I came here to work for Apple. They're actually not factual. I started working for Apple before I came here. Helped in the launch of the Macintosh, started programming the Mac and building software for the languages. But I did not come here knowing that I was going to work at Apple. I was still a little bit open-minded, actually, and spent the first part of my journey visiting all the great institutions of the East. So I went from MIT to Princeton to all these colleges to try to really make sure that's not what I wanted to do. And I took a plane from there to San Francisco and had decided, having known Europe reasonably well, that staying at the International Youth Hostel would be a great idea in America. How many of you know what an International Youth Hostel is? How many of you have stayed in one? How many of you have stayed in one in America? So you all know, they don't work the way they work everywhere else, right? Everywhere else, this is places for youth to travel safely and stay. In America, they are so remote, you can't find them. So, anyone here who lives in South Bay, Saratoga? Do you realize there's an International Youth Hostel in Saratoga? Yeah. Up on Sanborn?
You hike there.
That's where I decided to stay. So I get off the plane, I get on a Greyhound, and I go to Saratoga. And in the middle, and it's a big Greyhound, so I go to the bathroom, I come out, they stop a couple of places, including Cupertino. I get out, and I start walking, and I'm looking for maps, and I look, and I realize in the bus, someone had stole all of my money, my purse, and every form of connection I had to the rest of the world. And I looked, the bus was long gone. So I walk to the first door I see and say, I need to use your phone. And they're like, you're out of your mind. You're not coming in my home and using your phone. I'm like, fine. So it looked close by. So I walked up Highway 9, about 2.7 or 8 miles roughly, right? Something like that, up above the Japanese place. And I show up, I said, well, I have some good news and bad news. Good news is I'm the person who reserved being here tonight. Bad news is I can't pay even for a night. And they said, well, how much money do you have? So I go through my pocket, I have $9.17. That number became very, very important number. And they're like, okay, well, we're $5 a night. So you can stay here for 1 3/4 of a day. I'm like, okay, that's not gonna help. So I negotiated working while I figured things out. And they said, fine, we're a youth hostel. There's lots to do. So first was clean the hostel, that was the first night. And the second night they found a long-term project, and that was cleaning the sewage system. So my first job in America was in Saratoga, manually cleaning out the sewage system. And if you have a problem, please call me. I can tell you how it's done. I'm not gonna do it. And in the meantime, I decided I was not gonna tell anyone this happened. Again, I don't know why I decided that. That's a true story. And my aunt found out later, got very upset with me because that was not fair. But I decided I'm not telling anybody. So I completely stopped all communication and showed up at Apple the next day and met with some of the people I knew. I wasn't looking for a job yet. I had no idea what I was going to do. And then I went to a little company, unknown. I met with a gentleman by the name of John Warnock. And that company was about to become Adobe Systems. They had not purchased Aldus yet with Mage PageMaker. So desktop publishing had not started yet. And if you know what Adobe was, it's at the other end of Embarcadero, past 101. So imagine getting there. I have a very distinct memory of meeting him. We became good friends later. And that process lasted for quite a period of time while I tried to regain my passport without ID. And I actually, in preparation for this, went through some of my belongings and found that the Indian consulate gave me a passport without any ID. That's pretty amazing that there was so much trust in what had happened. And opening a bank account and just trying to figure out a way to get my ticket back, because that was the exit. And I said, I'm going to be realistic. And I don't think I would have been, but that's what I said to myself. I'm going to give myself this much time, and if things work out, they work out. If not, I will get the ticket back to go back home. And that is probably why I consider California home as much, like not more now. I've lived here more than I've lived in India. Is where you find yourself as a young adult is home. It's where your heart is. So when people talk about the valley fondly, I have very fond memories of the valley and the substrata and things people just don't see because these things become invisible to us. And the Yugoslavs who were in the fields in the 80s are long forgotten. They were replaced by others, and well before people from Mexico came. And you don't remember any part of that valley's history. I remember all the trees outside of Apple, walking up to it. And through a series of circumstances, I started to work as a programmer first, but I did not work at Apple initially. And then one day I was walking down a path and I looked down, there was a fortune cookie paper lying on the street, and I picked it up. And that's a true story. And it says, all your financial troubles will soon be over. I'm like, whatever. I wish I'd kept it. And that evening I saw a little ad which said, looking for someone that has skills in design, business, and knows computer programming. It didn't say where or who or what. I said that ad was for me. And I called. It was a position at Apple in Cupertino. I went to interview at 10 a.m. on Monday, and at 12 p.m. that day I started again with Apple. So there was a lapse of time in between. And the 80s were very good for me. Yeah, I went from 917 to my first paycheck was, I think, $1,200 for the week of work. Life was very, very nice. And I was the lowest level at Apple at my first job here in Cupertino. And a year later, I found myself in the office of John Scully. Steve Jobs had just left, was made to leave. And I was presenting a white paper called Information Navigation in the Future of Computing. About 20 minutes into that meeting, John looks at me and says, "I want you to work for me." And I was like, "Okay, what does that mean?" He said, "I want you to work for me. You know, whatever you're doing, you can do. You're going to be sitting right here." So for the next 7 years of my tenure at Apple, I had the fortune of sitting outside the chairman and CEO's office and watching how boards work, how a company goes from 100 million to 400 million to 12 billion, to how boards not work, to auditors changing, to what is an auditor, to why legal is really important. It was an incredible ride at Apple. It was one of the best times of my life. I also had the fortune in the late 80s, on a whim by Michael Spindler, who was president of International, to move to Paris. And then starts the story of what happened post the 80s into the 90s. Paris really liberated me again. And Apple was always an incredibly creative, technical, and challenging job. But there was something about being at Apple in Paris, which was the head of Apple International, and Apple owned the concept of computers in France. It was one of the